Hello, everyone. This is Decoding Devy, and we're moving on to week 9. I am Brandon Hay, and you can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. And this podcast is brought to you by the IDP guys. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel for lots of great content. So, last week we had a lot of big matchups again, some that help shape what the conference is going to look like. First, let's talk about Syracuse going to Clemson at noon. I think it would have been a different story if this game was at night, but Syracuse got out to a good lead. But surprisingly, they just did not give Sean Tucker the ball. He only had 5 carries. He did have a receiving touchdown. They just decided to try to pass the ball a lot more and run the ball with Garrett Schrader. They did get the lead. DJU did struggle through a couple interceptions. They made the change to K. Klubnik. I think it was just in name because to get DJ out of there for a little bit because they just continued to run the ball. Klubnik only had 19 yards rushing, 2 completions. But Will Shipley really led them with over 170 yards, and Clemson, once they came back, Syracuse was just not able to move the ball enough once they got to 21 points, not scoring any in the second half. So a big win for Clemson, and we'll see if Syracuse can bounce back next week as they just got their first loss. Next, Ole Miss visited LSU. I'm going to say I thought this totally wrong. I thought Ole Miss would be able to win this game even on the road, but LSU took Ole Miss in their first loss. Ole Miss struggled offensively other than Quinshon Judkins did have 2 touchdowns over 100 yards. Jaden Daniels had a huge game with 5 touchdowns, over 350 total yards as LSU keeps rolling and could have a say, in the SEC West because they've only lost 1 game so far. TCU kept it rolling at home against Kansas State. Adrian Martinez did get injured. Kansas State was up 28-10, but TCU was able to come back with Condre Miller and Quentin Johnson able to get the 3 final touchdowns. So TCU's undefeated, and they control their destiny in the Big 12. Texas had another collapse late in the game against Oklahoma State. They had a lead in the fourth quarter. Bijan Robinson had another good game, 140 rush yards, 40 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. Quinn Ewers ended up with 3 interceptions, 2 of those in the fourth quarter. And Spencer Sanders, the quarterback for Oklahoma State, threw for almost 400 yards to lead the comeback. So Texas just can't seem to get over that hump to win these type of games. And lastly, probably one of the bigger games, probably right along with Clemson and Syracuse. Oregon played UCLA at home. I thought UCLA would be able to win this, but Bo Nix had a great game with 5 touchdowns. Torrey Franklin, 2 touchdowns and over 100 yards. Bo Nix is really putting together a great season here at Oregon. And I trusted Thompson Robinson more, but he was somewhat contained with only 260 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception, only 38 yards rushing. But Bo Nix really carved up that UCLA defense. Zach Charbonnet did have a nice game with over 150 yards. This game was tied 10-10 in the second quarter, and then Oregon would outscore UCLA 28-6 through 3 quarters to really put them up where UCLA just could not come back. So that would give UCLA their first loss in the Pac-12. So week 9, we don't necessarily have as many big games, but we still have some very important matchups. First, Ohio State goes to Penn State. Luckily for the Buckeyes, this is not a night game. So the whiteout at night is really gives Penn State an edge, but I think Ohio State last week, they ended up winning big against Iowa, but in the first half struggled a little bit. C.J. Stroud had a fumble that was ran back for a touchdown by Iowa when they pressured, And Ohio State struggled in the red zone, settling for field goals, but Iowa just could not score touchdowns. So they eventually came on top. So it'll be important for Penn State to put pressure on CJ Stroud. And also, it'll depend on how Sean Clifford plays. He had almost 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in that bounce back win against Minnesota. They only allowed 165 rush yards, which was very different than when they allowed over 400 in Michigan. So Penn State has some good defensive backs. They cover the pass pretty well, but they haven't run up against an offense like Ohio State. So it'll be interesting how Ohio State attacks this Penn State defense, if they'll try to run the ball more or just pass it. But most of all, it'll be if Penn State can score enough points to stay in the game later to have a chance to win. I think this game will be close, but Ohio State will kind of pull away at the end, winning by at least 10 points. Oklahoma State is going to Kansas State with a possible Hobble Martinez, Adrian Martinez, and then Spencer Sanders has just been playing really good lately. I think it'll stay close, but the Cowboys will be able to pull away late. And then a big one at SEC, Kentucky versus Tennessee. It's a test. It's the best defense. Tennessee's going to see, but it is in Knoxville. I believe in Hendon Hooker more than Will Levis at this point in the season. So I think Tennessee gets the win, but it could be lower scoring game than Tennessee usually plays because Kentucky can run the ball. And like I said, they have a good defense. There's a couple games where teams that had big wins last week kind of have letdowns. TCU goes to West Virginia after that big win against Kansas State. And they've actually had quite a few games straight which were big games that they ended up winning. West Virginia's struggling, but want to see that TCU can continue their winning ways and not fall there. Same with Oregon, big win against UCLA, but they're going to California, a much improved California team that has some components on offense that can score. But I think Oregon should be able to handle that. This is a big one. If Bo Nix can continue this, not have the up and down. He's been pretty good this season, but see if he can put multiple huge games together. Next, talked about this. Can Syracuse bounce back? They play at home to and Notre Dame, and we'll see. Notre Dame has won a couple of games lately, but obviously is not the team they have been the past couple of years. Will Syracuse get Sean Tucker back in the fold and come back from letting that lead go against Clemson? And then this shouldn't be a contest, but as a rivalry game, it always does. Michigan plays Michigan State at home at night. So they should be very focused, but the Spartans have won the last 2 games. So this will be a big one where if Michigan can keep on rolling, if they want to keep their national championships hopes alive. Ultimately, this won't really affect the Big Ten race because they still have to beat Ohio State anyway, even if they get a loss to Michigan State. But for Harbaugh and for Michigan, if they've really turned the corner, they need to show that they could take on their rivals and beat them because this is Michigan State's season as they've had a poor season so far. And, the world's largest cocktail party happens on Saturday, Florida, Georgia. Georgia should be, the winner, but can, Florida and Billy Napier and, with Anthony Richardson, can they have some magic? He really has been struggling this season, last 5 games. He's not getting the passing yards necessarily or the rushing, so will Georgia be able to stop them? And lastly, a surprise team in the Big Ten, Illinois, will they be able to take care of Nebraska, keep the lead in the West? They should be favored in every game except Michigan the rest of the way, so they could very well put themselves on the way to win the West. So now let's go ahead and look at the start sets. So last week there were 10 start sets, or not 8 start sets. Sorry about that. And Three of the sets ended up injured and did not play. I did not know until the game started that George Halani was not going to play for Boise State. Adrian Martinez and Tanner Mordecai got injured in the first half, albeit I don't think they would have made the top 24. I didn't count them. So this week we went 3 out of 5. Devin the Chain finished as running back 16 in a loss to South Carolina. Valde did not have as great a game for Arizona State. Ryan Hemby from Maryland had a huge game, his second straight big game, taking over the carries. He finished as running back 2 with 38 fantasy points. Michael Pratt did not have a huge game, but Tulane did have a win to keep their impressive season going. Finished as QB 46, so not what I was looking for. And Seth Sean Tucker, he still had 15 points, but as I said, they really didn't give him the ball enough, and he finished as a running back 49. So that puts my record continue over 51%. So hopefully this coming week we can, no injuries and can get some more start sets to help you win some of those college fantasy games. So the starts, KJ Jefferson versus Auburn. Auburn's giving up 400 yards a game, and KJ Jefferson has the dual threat. He's been playing well lately, so I have him as a start. Zay Flowers versus UConn. He's been very up and down, but 2 of the last 3 games, he's been over 130 receiving yards. UConn is up 249 pass yards a game, which is 89th in the country. Another start, Condre Miller versus West Virginia. West Virginia only gives up 138 rush yards a game, but Miller has over 100 in 2 TDs in 3 out of the last 4 games. So I think he'll be able to have a nice game there, and those touchdowns could help get him in the top 24, even if he doesn't have a huge game of 150 or more. Next is Dwayne McBride versus FAU. FAU is 102nd versus the run, giving up 184 rush yards a game. And McBride has been very good this season, so I see him as having a great day. And lastly, Quinshon Judkins, he has 100 yards in 4 of the last 5 games and 9 touchdowns in the last 5 games. Texas A&M gave up a very nice day to Marshawn Lloyd in South Carolina last week. Seems like Jimbo's kind of losing that team. After that loss, Ole Miss will want to come out. We'll see how Texas A&M kind of responds, but I think he will have a very big game, even though we'll have to see if Zach Evans returns this week. Sets, John Reese Plumlee versus Cincinnati. UCF had a tough game against East Carolina last week. Plumlee has been either going off crazy for 6 touchdowns or very poor games. Cincinnati has a good defense, giving up only a little over 300 total yards a game, which is top 15. I just don't think Plumlee will put up the huge numbers this week. I mentioned Anthony Richardson. He plays Georgia. He struggled against good defenses. Georgia is, even though they are not as good as last year, Georgia is still only giving up 267 yards a game. Richardson's big part of his fantasy potential and his pro potential is his running ability, but he has only rushed over 50 yards 2 of his last 5 games, and he has only passed for over 200 yards 2 of the last 5 games. So he's going to have to, buck the trend on both of those to have a big game for Georgia. This is wrong. Actually, Jaden Ott, who plays for California, is against Oregon. Apologize for that. But Jaden Ott is one of those good weapons for California offense this year. Oregon's the top 15 rush defense, only giving up 112 yards a game. I know that Charbonnet had 150 last game, but UCLA is much better than California. So I would set Jaden Ott if you have someone that could play instead of him. Next, Deuce Vaughn, very good running back from Kansas State, but he has under 100 yards in the last 2 games. And even though Oklahoma State has struggled a little on rush defense, giving up 156 rush yards per game, I think with Adrian Martinez possibly hobbled or not playing, that's going to make it harder on Deuce Vaughn. And lastly, Jalen Hyatt has been really going off lately with the Cedric Tillman injury. But Kentucky is top 15 versus the pass, so I don't think he's going to get the necessary, large numbers that he has been getting. Okay, so not a great week for bets last week. BYU got manhandled by Liberty 41-14. Thought this would be a huge game, UCF and East Carolina, scoring back and forth, but it was 34-13 East Carolina. UCF offense was shut down, so only a total of 47. They didn't keep up their end of the deal. Cincinnati would have won by, would have covered, but there was a late touchdown by SMU to pull within two, but didn't get the 2-point conversion. So wrong with that one. And yet again, I had too much faith in Texas A&M as South Carolina won by 6 at home. Horrible trend for Jimbo and Texas A&M, losing 3 straight games. So down to 32% on these bets. So definitely need to turn it around. So let's see what I have this week. Like I said, I plan on, or I think Syracuse is going to bounce back against Notre Dame at home. 2.5-point favorite. I like that. Cincinnati is a 1-point favorite on the road to UCF. Like I said, I think their defense can take care of UCF on the road. And Cincinnati continues that and kind of knocks UCF out of contention in that American league with their second conference loss. This game's going to be tough to watch for anyone. Northwestern at Iowa. Northwestern's offense isn't great. Iowa's defense is very good, and Iowa can't score. I'm thinking under at 37.5. I just don't know unless the Iowa defense really scores a bunch of points. I don't see where all those points come from. And lastly, Oklahoma State at Kansas State. I'll take the over at 56.5. I think this, even though Martinez might be banged up, I see this be a pretty high-scoring game as Oklahoma State with Spencer Sanders has been scoring, in the 30s to 40s lately, and I think they can continue that. All right, now DraftKings. I went into a contest last week. I actually finished third, but only first place won. But as you can see, I scored almost 188 points, almost in second place, and then just behind the first place. So I had a lot of good hits this week. Sam Hartman, it was worth paying up against BC over 43 points. Garrett Schrader had 22. He did most of that in the first half. Jatavian Sanders had 76 yards, so only at his 3,700, 13 points. I like Michael Mayer had a big game. UNLV, Zay Flowers had a big game. McClellan for Cincinnati, over 100 yards and a touchdown. Big game. A.T. Perry had a touchdown and 42 receiving yards, but only at 13 points. He was the one that really held me back because I spent the 7,400 on him. And Valladay didn't really have the return with only 14 fantasy points when it gave 6,600. So the two that I didn't hit weren't bad plays. It's just they didn't meet up with the salary they had. So let's see if we can have another strong week on DraftKings. This is who I have. I already talked about KJ Jefferson. 3 out of the last 4 games, he's been over 30 fantasy points. Talked about Auburn's poor defense. But then I have Tank Bigsby for Auburn. Arkansas gives up 158 rush yards per game. So I think he's going to do. And then McClellan for Cincinnati, he has over 100 yards the last 2 games. UCF gives up over 145 rush yards a game. So I think Cincinnati's going to continue to run the ball. Luke Fickell really likes that balance of being able to run and then, some play action. I think they'll try to do that, especially in the road. Quentin Johnston has really come on the past few games. 460 yards, 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games. West Virginia gives up over 300 pass yards a game. So I really like Quentin Johnston here. I really paid the extra on the wide receivers. Troy Franklin, talked about him having that big game against UCLA. He's kind of become one of the bigger targets for Bo Nix. Franklin, 2 of the last 4 games over 100 yards. Cal giving up over 280 passing yards a game. Brian Ford-Wheaton, over 16 fantasy points the last 4 games. TCU gives up over 268 pass yards per game. The offense has been not great, but Ford-Wheaton has been performing well. Bryson Green for Oklahoma State had a big game last week. In the last 2 weeks, he's been over 25 fantasy points and 100 receiving yards the last 2 games. So, I think Spencer Sanders will look for him. And then lastly, Garrett Schrader has been over 20 fantasy points 4 out of 5 games and only at 5,900. I think that's a steal. And I think he bounces back yet again against Notre Dame that has, an okay defense, but not nearly what they had before. All right, price picks. This is the actual part of the betting. I did well last week. I got all 4 of my bets correct. Jaden Daniels, 40.5. I went over. He ended up with 121 rush yards. A huge game for him to beat Ole Miss. Elijah Cooks at 73.5 receiving yards. He had 134 receiving yards, a huge over. Caden Prieskorn for Memphis at 3.5 receptions. Barely got it, but he had 4 receptions for 55 yards. Lastly, Aiden O'Connell with 29.5 completions. He had 31, so close, but he got over. He was 31 for 46, 320 yards, but 3 interceptions, and that was the main reason why Wisconsin was able to get that win. Now my 4 for this week, I'm up to 43%. Let's see if I can get even closer. If I go for the full 4 again this week, even closer to 50. So I hope that these will hit, and maybe you guys can win some money. Chase Brown for Illinois. I have the over at 125.5 yards. He's been over 125 the last 3 games. And against Nebraska, the defense has struggled, and Illinois really likes to run the ball with Chase Brown. And Chase Brown has just been playing amazing this season. Marquise Irving for Oregon. It's at 72.5 rush yards. He has 6 of his last 7 games have been over 74 yards or more. So I like that against that Cal defense. Another Oregon player, Troy Franklin, at 60.5 receiving yards. Franklin has been 2 out of 4 of his games have been over 100. So this one is a little more risky, I think, because he has said that the 2 games will be under that. But I think they'll continue their momentum, and Franklin will be able to get over that number of 60.5. Lastly, JT Daniels, the quarterback for West Virginia, at 270.5 projected passing yards. I take the under on this one. 4 of his last 5 games has been under 255 pass yards. Daniels has just been inconsistent and not been able to lead that offense. So those are the props I have this week. So that will do it for the preview of Week 9. Looking back, Week 8 should be another good week of football. Not as many big matchups, but still some intriguing ones. And college football is fastly approaching the end, so you want to savor all these games because the season goes by so quickly. So again, this Decoding Devy, and you can find me on Twitter at HeyB3. And remember to like and subscribe to IDP Guys, and I will catch you guys next week.